They say less is more. But does that also apply to these three A2 adventure bikes? And how well do they perform off-road on long stretches of tarmac and in twisty mountain roads? Well, that's exactly what our 3-day trip through North Italy will show us, so you'd best come along for the ride.
Va bene?
And with that, greetings from the north of Italy. We have made it here. Right now I'm checking in from the top, well, not quite the top, but from the slopes of Monte Zoncolan, a pretty well-known mountain. The Giro d'Italia often passes over here. It's a tough one for cyclists and for motorcyclists too, because it's narrow, full of steep, tight hairpins. But before we even got here, before we crossed into Italy, we had, as is often the case for riders coming from Germany, Austria or Switzerland, where riding off-road legally isn't really possible, a long stretch of motorway ahead of us. We rode for almost 4 hours on the Autobahn from Wiener Neustadt, down through Styria, across Carinthia to Villach, then along the Hermagor main road, through the Gail Valley, and finally up to the Narsfeld Pass. And that's the sort of distance these three bikes need to handle well, because after all they're touring enduros. But which of them performs best in that setting? In general, I find the ergonomics on all three to be quite good. The KTM has the sportiest riding position, especially when you look at the knee angle. The foot pegs are set fairly high and back. The Royal Enfield is much more relaxed, as is the Brixton, which also has its foot pegs further forward. That means your thighs are almost horizontal with a nearly right-angled knee bend. On both of those, your arms stretch nicely over the larger tanks towards the handlebar, while on the KTM, since the seat runs far forward and the tank isn't quite as bulky, you can sit noticeably closer to the bars. On the motorway, we were cruising at around 125 to 130 kilometers per hour. All three managed that comfortably. They've all got 6-speed gearboxes, and at that cruising speed, all of them are running at fairly high revs. The Royal Enfield sits at roughly 6,500 revs. The KTM is just under 7,000, same as the Brixton Storr. None of them vibrate in an annoying way though. The KTM has slightly higher frequency vibrations through the bars and foot pegs, but still within a tolerable range. No numb hands even after longer stints. The Brixton, I think, vibrates even less at motorway pace. Those vibrations only show up later when you're pushing it harder on country roads. We'll get to that soon. The Himalayan, again, has only minor high-frequency vibrations, not bothersome at all. We also measured fuel consumption, since all three have different tank sizes. The Himalayan has the biggest tank at 17 liters, the Brixton slightly smaller with 16 liters, and the KTM the smallest at 14 liters. Here's how the fuel figures looked. On our motorway stretch, where revs were constantly high, the Himalayan managed 3.97 liters per 100 kilometers, so it's the only one to stay under 4, making it the clear range queen. The KTM consumed 4.22 liters per 100 kilometers, a bit more, and with its smallest tank you still get just over 300 kilometers of range. The Brixton was the thirstiest, with its twin-cylinder engine that likes to rev using 4.36 liters per 100 kilometers. Still, I'd call that an entirely respectable figure, and with 16 liters in the tank, you can cover nearly 400 kilometers. When full, its display even showed a range of 380 kilometers, which I fully believe. So yes, you can go far on these. But what about comfort? Wind protection. And in principle, the KTM has a huge windscreen. If you're a bit shorter than I am, I'm 1.85 meters, the wind protection is spot on. For me though, the wind hits roughly here, causing a bit of turbulence and extra noise. But if I duck just a little, it becomes really calm and quiet behind the screen. And I take that over loud buffeting at the helmet any day. So very good wind protection overall. As for ergonomics, the KTM setup is comfortable enough for longer rides, at least for my height. The suspension was quite sporty at first, but with a broad adjustment range, we softened it up a bit and it became more comfortable. Like with many WP suspensions, it doesn't have ultra-refined response to small bumps. You still feel fine cracks or rough concrete joints. So yes, it's compliant enough on bigger bumps, no problem there. But the smaller impacts still get through a bit. The KTM seat is definitely the firmest of the three, which fits its more radical off-road character. You can move around easily and relieve pressure, that's fine, but after a while you do feel it. The same goes for the Brixton, though its seat widens towards the back, so if you slide back a little, you get some relief. However, its wind protection can't match the KTM's. On the Brixton, the screen hit me roughly at nose height, so the wind struck there and caused loud turbulence. On the plus side, its tank is broader, so the midsection of your body is better shielded from the wind. What impressed me most on the Brixton though was its suspension. For this price class, and from a smaller brand like Brixton, I hadn't expected such quality. It's made by KYB with 180 millimeters of travel at the front and about 175 or 176 at the rear, and it works really well. It's even adjustable, another plus point. We were genuinely impressed by that, even compared with the KTM. The suspension's response is excellent. And how about the Royal Enfield? It's the bike that makes you sit the highest and most exposed. It simply lacks the large windscreen that the KTM has, so its wind protection is the weakest. On the other hand, a screen is easy to fit afterwards. Its tank is broad, shielding your thighs and midsection nicely, and its seat is more thickly padded, very easily the most comfortable saddle among these three bikes. Its engine has that tractor-like character that I really appreciate, and even at higher revs it feels calmer and less strained than the other two. And the suspension response on the Enfield is genuinely impressive. It's remarkable to have such a capable suspension setup, even though the front isn't adjustable, yet for us it worked really well. It might become more critical if you're heavier or carrying luggage, because then those 200 millimeters of travel might start to show their limits. Still, the way it reacts, that fine sensitivity, deserves real praise for Royal Enfield. Once we'd finished the motorway section and reached the Nasfeld Pass, what a fantastic pass that is. It leads from Carinthia into Italy, beautifully built, one corner after another, and the asphalt quality varies enough to let you really get a feel for these bikes. And there, the weight differences became obvious. The Royal Enfield, fully fueled, weighed in at 200.5 kilograms. The KTM was almost 30 kilograms, or let's say about 25 kilograms, lighter at 176.5 kilograms fully fueled. The Brixton was the heaviest in this comparison. Unfortunately, we ran out of fuel before completely filling it at our yard, so the tank was only about 2/3 full, around 4 or 5 liters missing. And even then it weighed 210 kilograms. So fully fueled, you can assume around 215 kilograms. And yes, you really feel that weight when flicking it from one bend to the next. The KTM, by contrast, feels extremely agile yet stable thanks to its sporty suspension setup. You can throw it into bends confidently, push on the wide handlebars, and it just dances through the curves beautifully. The engine though needs to be worked hard, and you've got to choose the right gear. For instance, going uphill on a pass or even on smaller roads here in Friuli at 50 to 55 kilometers per hour in third gear, you'd think that's fine for a single cylinder, but there's hardly any pull. You really need to aim for 7,000 revs and above to get proper drive. That means lots of gear changes, though the quick shifter helps and works quite well. Sometimes it feels a bit inconsistent, a bit firm at times, light at others, but overall it does its job. And so you end up weaving through corners, shifting away constantly. The Brixton has a similar engine character, also quite rev hungry. You have to twist the throttle hard and shift a lot to keep it in the right gear, almost like riding a smaller sports bike. But with only 48 horsepower and much more weight to move, it obviously struggles more, especially uphill. You won't be winning any climbing races with it. However, its steering behavior is very harmonious. As I said, the suspension works nicely. It's got wider tires and goes for more middle ground adventure dimensions. 19 inches at the front, 17 at the back, 110 front section, 150 rear. That's compared with the 1990-21 setup on the Himalayan and KTM, which are proper enduro sizes. So it's got more rubber on the road, making its handling more neutral and flowing, yet still agile. Even though it has the most road-oriented tires, Pirelli Scorpion Rally STRS, they work brilliantly on tarmac, even in their standard OEM form. With this setup, you can lean further and further into corners smoothly without it feeling sluggish at all. It was genuinely fun, especially downhill, and the bike inspired a lot of confidence. The front brake is nicely controllable. The rear is too, though about halfway down the Nasfeld Pass it completely faded, so it's not the most heat-resistant system. You can say the same about the KTM's brakes. The KTM's front brake feels softer and spongier, typical off-road style, while the Brixton's has more bite but needs a bit more hand pressure. It builds braking power quickly though. On the KTM, the rear brake pedal sits a bit high, so when you're seated, you have to lift your foot awkwardly to reach it. It works, but again, not the most fade-resistant. On the descent of the Nasfeld Pass, our cameraman Schaff really pushed it, and by the end it was almost gone completely. So yes, the KTM's braking setup isn't really meant for downhill racing. And the Himalayan, well, it's kind of the middle ground of everything. Its brakes also fade a bit when ridden aggressively downhill, but it shines going uphill because its engine, as the only one that's not rev hungry, just pulls. As I said before, that tractor-like character, and you feel it. Even in third gear, if you come out of a slow turn, it doesn't cough or stall. It just goes thud, 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 chugging along confidently. The suspension also works beautifully, offering great stability despite the long travel and low price point. The handling hits that sweet spot, stable and predictable, yet still agile enough to have fun. The Himalayan is simply fun to ride. Because you sit on top of it with little bodywork in front of you, it feels natural and confidence-inspiring, especially when you're pushing the bars and leaning through turns. Now, a word on electronics. Some bikes have more, some less. All three have traction control and ABS. The KTM even has riding modes, while the Royal Enfield offers two modes, Eco and Performance. In Eco mode, you basically get the same power as the old 411 Himalayan, meaning almost none, so we avoided that mode completely. You don't need it, because even under slippery conditions, the tractor-like engine remains easily controllable, so performance mode all the way. On the KTM, the electronics package is the most comprehensive. The ABS works well, it doesn't intervene harshly when braking harder, though to be fair, it's hard to brake sharply with that soft front lever feel. The traction control felt a bit too intrusive on dry asphalt, so we switched it off. Given how the rev-happy engine delivers its power, not with sudden torque spikes, it's actually quite easy to handle even without assistance. I'd say even less experienced riders don't need to worry about switching it off in dry conditions. On the Brixton, it's even less of an issue. I couldn't even get the traction control to engage once. The engine simply doesn't have the instant grunt to make it necessary. And the Himalayan, well, that one fits my taste best, you might have guessed that already. In terms of engine performance and character, even with its tractor-like feel, it's the one that provides the most torque right away, so traction control simply isn't needed. And that's why Royal Enfield didn't bother fitting one. Of course, you have to ride a bit more carefully when the surface gets slippery, but even then the Himalayan's engine makes it easy. So that's enough about road riding. We'll now descend from Monte Zoncolan and head back towards the border up into the wilderness near Stranigarm. That's where I'll check in again with probably the most interesting part, the off-road riding.
Ja, erstmal ausbreiten vor versammelter Mannschaft.
Und damit haben wir es geschafft. Zurück in der Heimat, alles hinter
And there we are.
mir
We
ist
made it.
Österreich.
Behind me is Austria. Behind the camera is Italy and Friuli. It's been a lovely tour, a real mix. Motorway, alpine passes, tight corners, gravel sections. And we'd actually planned even more off-road riding. Sadly, I took a spill with the KTM in a gravel bend before we got to the more ambitious off-road part. Still, I think we covered plenty of variety and gathered enough impressions to say something about how well these bikes cope with proper touring on loose ground. The fundamental differences are fairly clear. The KTM is by far the lightest, has by far the longest suspension travel, and is the one that most clearly pushes towards the off-road segment. That gives it big points for suspension, chassis and ergonomics. I find the ergonomics excellent. If you're really tall, say 1.90 m and above, you might find the handlebar a bit low, so you'd probably want to fit rises. For my 1.85 m, it's still very good. The balance between active and upright is spot on, meaning you can ride longer off-road stretches without back pain. The bike's narrow through the middle, the seat is long, and there's loads of room to move about. Top marks for off-road ergonomics. The suspension is stable with plenty of reserves, which we certainly didn't come close to using fully, and it offers a wide adjustment range so you can fine-tune it. Then there's the engine, the same one as in the 390 Duke, which I've often described as very rev-happy. For me, off-road, that's not ideal. I like to have torque available instantly. But here you've got to shift a lot and keep the revs in the upper range, more like you would on twisty roads. Many riders love this engine, and fair enough, the 390 Duke sells like hotcakes, so I won't say it's a bad engine. But do try it yourself to see if that kind of motor suits you in an enduro chassis. I'm at the point where I'm also looking for a light companion for more serious off-road touring alongside my Tenere. If this bike had a more tractor-like engine, it would be exactly what I want. The smaller flaws, like the less fade-resistant brakes, could be forgiven. You could argue that for an A2 touring enduro costing over 8,000 euros, that should be better. But these are minor issues, and once you adapt, it all works fine. And as I said, its strengths are big and quite unique too. Not only in this trio, but also in the wider market, there are hardly any A2 touring enduros that take off-road riding this seriously. With a different engine it would be perfect for me, but as it is you'll have to test it for yourselves. By comparison, the Brixton takes off-road riding least seriously. You can tell from the wheel sizes. The shortest suspension travel, the highest weight, but yet it still performs decently. I've already praised its suspension several times, both on tarmac and gravel, and it's genuinely good for its price. The front brake might feel a bit sharp at first, but you get used to it. The rear one started squealing later on because Scharf cooked it on a descent. In terms of durability, we don't yet have long-term experience, but braking control was good, and the ergonomics worked fine for standing up riding. There isn't a huge amount of space to move forward, but enough to ride comfortably. You do, however, have to take it easy, and that's mainly down to the engine. Like the KTM, the Brixton Storr's twin-cylinder is very rev-hungry. Combined with its relatively heavy weight and roughly 48 horsepower, it really struggles to get going off-road. On our way up to the Straniger Alm, the last few meters of the track were gravel mixed with rocky slabs. This year it was particularly tricky because timber lorries had been up there dragging mud across the path in those slow, slippery sections where traction breaks away or the rear wheel lifts over bumps. The Brixton finds it hard to get back on the boil. So more than taking it easy, it's really a case of crawling along when the ground gets loose. I don't think the Storr is aimed at sporty riders or off-road experts. And what about the Himalayan? I've already done quite a few trips with it, and even after this one I'm still impressed. It's the cheapest bike here in its most basic version, costing 6,500 euros in Austria, and that's quite something. Yet it offers the longest range, and the ergonomics, much like on the KTM, strike a great balance between relaxed and active. Even with the largest tank, 17 liters, there's still plenty of room to move around, and standing up feels natural. If you're very tall, again, you might want to raise the bars, but for me it's spot on. The engine, unlike the other two, is exactly what I want in an enduro, tractor-like. No matter what happens, if you lose momentum on slippery ground or get distracted, either you can open the throttle and it just goes thud, 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 thud. The engine feels utterly confident, pulls smoothly, and never sounds like it's gasping for air. Unlike the KTM at low revs or the Brixton when it bogs down, I personally love that. Add to that a clutch that's easy to modulate and suspension that, while not adjustable, yes, that could be criticized, is superbly tuned straight out of the box. Whether on tarmac or off-road, it just works. Scharf rode it too and said the same. The Himalayan, simply the best thing. It works and it feels genuinely good. And then there's the comfort. Easily the best of the three. It even comes with some nice tech touches, like built-in 3D Google Maps navigation on the display. The others can't compete with that. So in total, and this brings me to my conclusion, the Himalayan really is the winner here. The Brixton Storr, on the other hand, is a solid first attempt by Brixton in the adventure touring segment. They don't need to be embarrassed. It has several strong points. If they give the engine a bit more punch, maybe take a cue from a rival like the Honda NX500, which has more torque in the mid-range, and shave off a few kilos, I'd see it as a very capable, if somewhat heavy, touring machine that can even handle gentle gravel trails. And for 7,000 euros in Austria, you do get plenty for your money. Auxiliary lights, a USB port, a large display, and those handy little tank pouches. Everything fits together quite nicely. Its small weaknesses are forgivable for a first model, and hopefully they'll keep improving it. And the KTM, well, it's the most uncompromising A2 adventure bike. I've already talked about everything it does well, and I think it's fantastic overall. It's great that it exists. I was never a big fan of the previous 390 Adventure, which was a bit too road-focused for my taste. I'd always wanted something like this Adventure R. Only the engine, in my opinion, could use a little more low-end torque. If that happens, I'd be very keen. Until then, we'll have to wait and see what you think and how the market reacts to these bikes. Which one will come out on top, which one might be discontinued again. Let me know what you think, but drop it in the comments, and I hope our effort here, including my crash with the KTM, was worth a thumbs up from you. Thanks a lot for watching, see you next time, take care, and bye-bye.